Palmyra. Palmyra was a very small rural community. I mean, we're talking 3 creatures that look like wolves. These huge creatures that are looking right at them.
If you have ever been somewhere truly remote at night, you know what silence sounds like. Not the quiet of a city street at 3 a.m. Real silence. The kind where your own heartbeat becomes the loudest thing in the room. A family in Maine experienced that silence one evening on their porch and knew instantly that something was wrong. Every animal on their farm had gone quiet at the same time. And when they pointed a flashlight into the dark to find out why, 5 sets of eyes were already staring back at them. The Martins moved to Palmyra. In 2005, a man named Eric Martin was working at a paper mill in Maine when his back gave out. After 23 years on the job,
back in 2005, Eric Martin suffered a debilitating injury while working at the paper mill where he'd spent most of his career, forcing him to retire early and putting his family into a very difficult financial position.
A slipped disc ended his career overnight. The injury was severe enough that he could barely bend down to pick something off the floor, let alone continue doing physical labor. He was forced into early retirement, and the family's income collapsed almost immediately. His wife, Shelley, found a new job that could keep them afloat, but it came with a catch. They would need to relocate closer to her workplace. Their daughter, Chelsea, was still finishing high school, so they needed somewhere affordable that would not force her to switch schools mid-year. That ruled out most options, but it did not rule out Palmyra. Palmyra, Maine, is a town of about 1,900 people, roughly 30 miles from Bangor and a few miles north of the slightly busier town of Pittsfield. It is the kind of place where your nearest neighbor is a field away, and the nearest grocery store is a drive. The Martins found a rental farmhouse sitting on 5 acres of land off Madawaska Road, surrounded on 3 sides by dense forest. It was nobody's dream home, but Eric figured the quiet would do him good while he recovered. And for about a year, it did. Eric and Shelley settled into a routine. Most nights, after Chelsea went to bed, the two of them would sit out on the porch with a cup of decaf coffee, listening to the radio, watching the stars, and talking about the kind of nothing that married people talk about when the day is done. The dogs would be sleeping inside. The fields would be still. It was the kind of peace that people move to the middle of nowhere to find. It is worth remembering that feeling. That's calm. Because once you understand how safe this family felt in the beginning, the rest of this story hits differently. One night, during their usual porch routine, Shelley noticed something in the tree line about 100 feet from the house. A light, not a flashlight, not headlights. She described it as pulsating. It would glow bright, then fade, then glow again, almost like something breathing. Eric saw it too. They watched it for several minutes and could not explain it. There were no roads back there, no houses, no power lines, just dense Maine forest and something glowing inside it. And then, one night, they saw the lights again. And this time, they decided to go find out what it was. The lights and the den. Eric called his son Sean to come over. Sean arrived, and the 3 of them watched the pulsating glow from the porch. Sean initially thought it looked like a flashlight way off in the distant corner of the field. But as they watched, it started changing and moving. Their first instinct was to poachers. Maine has a well-known problem with illegal night hunters using spotlights to freeze deer before shooting them, and the Martins figured someone might be using their property to do exactly that. So, Eric and Sean grabbed flashlights and headed toward the woods to confront whoever was out there. They did not bring guns. The firearms were locked in a strongbox up in the barn loft, and in the moment, they did not think to go get them. This is a detail that becomes very important later. When they reached the tree line, the lights vanished. Just gone. As if someone had flipped a switch. They stepped into the forest anyway, and Eric made a decision that still makes no sense to me. He told Sean to turn off his flashlight, split up, and circle around to sneak up on any potential poachers from behind. What happened next is something Eric struggled to put into words. He said that once he was alone in those trees, a feeling came over him unlike anything he had experienced in a lifetime of hunting in Maine. He described it as a primal awareness that he was being watched, not the casual unease of being alone in the dark, but something deeper, something that made the hair on his arms stand up and his body go rigid. His attention was pulled to a shadowy area to his left, as if his subconscious had detected something his eyes could not see. And then, just as suddenly as it came, the feeling vanished. The forest went silent. He said you could have heard a pin drop. They found no tracks, no evidence of any person. They went home more confused than before. A few weeks later, Chelsea and her boyfriend Nathan were walking the family's dogs through those same woods in broad daylight. The dogs caught a scent and started pulling hard, leading them deeper into the trees. They followed the hounds to something strange. It was a hole in the ground, covered loosely with brush, but it was not natural. Nathan got down on his hands and knees and peered inside. He described it as oddly round and enormous, roughly 5 feet by 10 feet.
Chelsea and her boyfriend Nate were out for a walk with the family's dogs when they had a strange experience of their own, when the hounds suddenly started leading them deeper into the trees. It seemed like they'd caught the scent of something. Nate got down on his hands and knees and peered into the opening,
as if it had been dug deliberately, not by an animal, by something with hands. Chelsea felt an immediate, overwhelming urge to leave. She did not argue about it. She did not rationalize it. She grabbed the dogs and told Nathan they were going. Right now. Whatever instinct told Chelsea to run was about to be proven right, because the thing that dug that den was not gone. It was just waiting for dark. The night of the creatures. Everything came apart on a holiday weekend night. Chelsea had already gone to bed. Eric and Shelley were on the porch, coffee in hand, as always, but something felt wrong. Shelley noticed it first. It was quiet. Not peaceful and quiet. Wrong, quiet. There were no sounds coming from the fields at all. No crickets, no frogs, no rustling from the animals that should have been grazing nearby. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Eric felt it too. He had been a hunter all his life. He had spent decades in the Maine wilderness, and he knew what the woods sounded like when everything was normal. This was not normal. This was the sound of every living thing in the area holding its breath. He told Shelley they needed to go inside. She pushed back for a moment, the way you do when someone says something that sounds dramatic and you are not ready to take it seriously. And then they both heard it. A rustling sound from somewhere in the field, close but invisible in the mist. They froze. Shelley grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the noise. 3 sets of eyes stared back at them. Not small eyes, not low to the ground.
And the noticeable quiet was broken by the sound of something rustling out of sight. They both froze and looked out in the direction of the sound, only to find 3 sets of eyes staring right back at them from the field.
These were large, greenish yellow, and glowing with an intensity that Shelley later described as fluorescent, as if they were lit from behind. They did not blink. She swept the flashlight across the rest of the property, and a wave of nausea hit her when she realized there were more. 5 sets of eyes in total, spaced out across the field in a pattern that was not random. These things were not clustered together like a startled herd. They were positioned in a wide arc. They were flanking the house. Eric had seen every animal that lives in the state of Maine. He had hunted bear, moose, deer, and everything in between. He told the paranormal witness crew that in that moment he had absolutely no idea what he was looking at. He knew it was not a bear. It was too tall, and the posture was wrong. But it was massive, and the way they were positioned made one thing clear. They were not afraid of him. They looked, in his words, like they were mad and wanted to come at us. The 2 of them turned and ran inside. Eric slammed the door shut and locked it behind them. And that is when they realized that every single weapon they owned was locked in the barn, 20 yards away in the dark, on the other side of those things. Trapped and defenseless. Eric's first words after locking the door were about the guns. He needed to get to the barn. Shelley's response, which she later shared on camera, was blunt. She told him not to go outside. They did not know what those things were. They did not know how fast they could move. And if something happened to Eric out there, she and Chelsea would be completely alone with no way to defend themselves. This is where a detail from earlier becomes critical. The guns were not in the house because Shelley had insisted they be stored in the barn. Eric had apparently disagreed with this arrangement, and in the interview, you can hear the frustration in his voice when he talks about it. But right or wrong, the decision had been made long before that night, and now they were living with the consequences. Shelley went upstairs to check on Chelsea. She woke her up and told her to look out the window. Chelsea, still half asleep, walked over, glanced outside, said, "Cool," and turned around to go back to bed. She told her mother to let her know what happened in the morning. Shelley was stunned, but Chelsea simply did not register what she was seeing. Her brain was not awake enough to process the threat. And there is something deeply unsettling about that, because it means one of two things. Either Chelsea's half-conscious mind looked at those creatures and felt no fear whatsoever, or what she saw from her window did not look as terrifying as what her parents described from the porch. Shelley stayed at the window, and that is when one of the creatures stood up. It rose from all fours onto its hind legs and looked directly at her. The height was staggering. Shelley later estimated them at 7 feet tall based on their size compared to the 10-foot barn door behind them. She described the moment as almost too much for your brain to process. These were not bears or wolves or anything she had ever seen. Their bodies had a hunched posture with muscular kangaroo-like thighs and feet that had a long arch and a heel like a human, ending in what looked like canine paws with very long claws. Their fur was smooth on the body but wild and tufty around the head. Their noses were 7 inches long, and their eyes, those enormous greenish-yellow eyes, had no visible pupils. Now, here is the thing about that description. Those details are incredibly specific, almost too specific for a terrified woman looking out a window at night through mist at creatures she had never seen before. And this becomes important later, when we talk about where those details might have actually come from. Shelley rushed through the house, checking every lock. Some of the windows were not just unlocked, but wide open. Then she realized she had not heard the dogs in a while. She searched the house, calling softly, dreading what she might find. Finally, she heard scurrying from inside a closet. The dogs were alive, but they were shaking so badly they could barely stand. Whatever was outside had terrified them into hiding without making a sound. Meanwhile, Eric had a plan. His truck was parked about 30 feet from the front door. If he could get to it, he could back it up, load the family, and drive away. He did not tell Shelley. He just grabbed his keys and went. Every step across the driveway sent pain shooting through his injured back, but he made it to the truck. Then the motion-activated light above the vehicle clicked on. The sudden brightness startled him, and he fumbled the keys. They hit the ground, and with his slipped disc, he could barely bend down to pick them up. That is when he heard movement in the shadows. Something was coming toward him fast. He could not reach the keys. He could not run. And then, just before it reached him, the creature stopped. The light from the motion sensor seemed to hold it in place, and after a frozen moment, it turned and bolted back into the dark. Eric shuffled back inside, leaving the keys on the ground. The truck was no longer an option, and whatever those things were, they now knew the family was trying to leave. The 911 call that went nowhere. Eric burst through the door for the second time that night, and Shelley met him at the stairs. She told him how stupid that was. He told her somebody had to do something. And finally, after all of this, one of them thought to call the police. They could have called 911 at any point that evening. The phone worked fine. The lines were not cut. There was no supernatural interference. They simply did not think of it until they had already exhausted every other option. And when they finally did call, Shelley made a mistake that cost them any chance of getting help. She told the truth. On a holiday weekend, when emergency services are understaffed and dispatchers are forced to prioritize calls, Shelley told the 911 operator that there are some things trying to get into our house. Not intruders, not armed men. That single word transformed what should have been an urgent home invasion call into what sounded like an animal control nuisance. The dispatcher asked clarifying questions. Shelley tried to explain. She said the creatures were 7 to 8 feet tall. The dispatcher told her to close her windows and lock her doors. Shelley, growing desperate, said, "These creatures can come through my walls if they want to get in." And according to the retelling, the dispatcher hung up after that. Shelley did not call back. And that is a detail worth sitting with. Because if you are genuinely in fear for your life, you call again. You call 10 times. You call until someone listens. The fact that she did not call back does not prove the story is false, but it does not help prove it is true either. Eric sat downstairs alone after the call, running through everything they had left. No truck, no guns, no police coming. And then he realized something. Every time those creatures had gotten close, light had stopped them. The motion sensor had frozen the one near the truck. The flashlight on the porch had kept them at a distance. He did not know why, but light seemed to be the one thing they would not cross. So he made one more attempt. He went outside and triggered the motion sensor, hoping the flood of light would give him a path to the barn. The light came on, and the creatures pulled back, but they did not leave. They gathered at the edge of the light's reach. Every direction Eric looked, he could see eyes glowing in the dark just beyond the boundary of the light. He was standing in a shrinking circle of safety, and the barn was still too far away. He turned around and went back inside. Shelley heard the creatures closing in behind him. She was standing at the top of the stairs when he came through the door for the third time, his face white, the hair standing up on the back of his neck. Their options were gone, and whatever was outside knew it. Siege until dawn. Shelley woke Chelsea up again, and this time there was no debate. She told her daughter to get up now. The three of them gathered in the master bedroom with the dogs. They locked the door. They closed the windows. And they waited. Eric sat with his back against the headboard and his eyes on the door. He later told the interview crew that there was definitely the thought that the end could come tonight, not as a dramatic statement, as a genuine assessment of the situation. He was a man who had spent his life around dangerous animals. He understood predator behavior, and what he was hearing outside that wall sounded like something working up the nerve to come in. Hours passed. The sounds would stop for long stretches and then start again, always from a different part of the house. Nobody slept. Nobody spoke much. They just sat in the dark and listened to things moving on the other side of the walls and tried not to think about how thin those walls actually were. Dawn came slowly, the way it does when you are counting every minute. The first gray light crept into the room, and the sounds had stopped. Shelley looked out the window. The fields were empty. Whatever had been out there was gone. Eric called Sean. His son arrived within the hour, and the two of them walked the property. According to the account, they found tracks. Large bipedal prints with an unusual shape, a kind of hook at the end, pressed deep into the soft ground near the farm pond. They found flattened grass in a wide pattern. They found strands of coarse fur caught on a fence. Shelley photographed the prints with her cell phone. Those photographs would have been the single most important piece of evidence in this entire case. Proof that something real and identifiable had been on that property. But when Shelley switched to a new phone and transferred her SIM card, the photos were lost. Gone. The only physical evidence that could have verified or debunked this story disappeared in a routine phone upgrade. And that is the moment where this story stops being about what was outside the house and starts being about something much harder to pin down. The truth behind the Palmyra wolves. Here is what most people do not know about the Palmyra wolves incident. The story did not reach the public because the Martins did not go to the police or the press. It reached the public because Shelley Martin was a longtime listener of Coast to Coast AM, the late-night radio show hosted by George Noory that reaches nearly 3 million people a week and regularly features guests discussing UFOs, cryptids, and conspiracy theories. One night, Shelley heard a guest named Linda Godfrey talking about a creature called the Dogman, a bipedal wolf-like being reported across America. Something clicked. Shelley reached out to Linda, and the Palmyra wolves were born. Linda Godfrey was not a fraud. She was a former award-winning newspaper reporter from Wisconsin who stumbled into cryptozoology in 1991 when her editor assigned her to cover reports of a werewolf near Elkhorn. She coined the term Beast of Bray Road and spent 3 decades collecting dogman reports with genuine journalistic methodology. She published the Palmyra account in her 2012 book, Real Wolfmen, and, to her credit, sent the manuscript to Shelley for approval before publication. Shelley confirmed that every detail was accurate. The problem is that the details in the book do not match the details Shelley later gave on television, and the contradictions are not small. In the book, the incident happened on Labor Day weekend 2007. On Paranormal Witness, Shelley said it was Memorial Day weekend 2006. In the book, the weather was sultry and foggy, typical of late summer in Maine. On TV, Shelley described it as cold and misty. In the book, Chelsea was 18. On TV, she was 17. In the book, the family dogs were standard poodles. On TV, they were beagles. In the book, the nightly coffee ritual was a spur-of-the-moment decision. On TV, it was something they did every single night.
They could have called the police at any time, literally any time. And they did call the cops, they dialed 911, and that should have been the end of it.
In the book, when Shelley called 911, she was told to contact the game warden. On TV, she spoke to a police officer. In the book, Shelley knew the dogs were hiding in the bedroom all night. On TV, she had to search the house to find them in a closet. These are not minor discrepancies. These are fundamental details of the same story told 2 different ways within 2 years by the same person, both of which she personally approved as accurate. The Paranormal Witness episode, The Wolf Pack, aired on Sci-Fi on August 7, 2013 as Season 3, Episode 9. Even Shelley admitted the show embellished things without permission. The nightmare sequence where a creature crashes through the bedroom window never happened. The scene where the family arms themselves with knives and hatchets was fabricated by producers. The dramatic argument about the guns was manufactured from spliced audio. Director William Bridges auditioned groups of 5 men crawling on floors to cast the wolf creatures, eventually hiring stunt performers and gymnasts led by an actor named Ian O'Brien, who Bridges said moved like a lizard rather than a wolf. But here is the detail that quietly changes everything about this case. The only person who ever provided a detailed physical description of the creatures was Shelley. Eric called them huge and said they were definitely not bears, but he never described their anatomy despite supposedly coming face-to-face with one at the truck. Sean's confirmation of the tracks is mentioned by Eric, but never appears in Sean's own interview footage, even though Sean was interviewed for the show. Nathan, who found the den, is not heard from again after that scene. The entire physical description, the 7-foot height, the kangaroo thighs, the humanoid feet, the 7-inch noses, the tufty fur, the pupilless fluorescent eyes, all of it comes from one person.
Their hind legs are shaped like a dog's, but the thigh area is much thicker, more like a kangaroo. And the feet are a bit odd. They have a very long arch and a heel like a human, but when they walk, it's like they're walking more on their toes.
A person who was an avid consumer of cryptid media. A person who heard Linda Godfrey describe the dogman on late-night radio and then contacted her to report creatures that matched that exact description. When people on the Maine subreddit were asked about the Palmyra wolves, locals who grew up in and around Palmyra said they had never heard anything about wolf creatures from anyone in the community. They mentioned weird people living in the woods. They mentioned mountain lion sightings. But not one person born and raised in that area had ever heard this story from a local source. And there is a scientific explanation sitting right in front of us the entire time. Maine is home to roughly 12,000 eastern coyotes. These are not ordinary coyotes. Genetic studies published in Molecular Ecology in 2014 revealed that eastern coyotes carry approximately 26% wolf and dog DNA. Males regularly weigh 50 to 60 pounds, with verified specimens exceeding 80 pounds in New York State. They have longer legs and larger jaws than western coyotes. They hunt cooperatively in packs, and when you shine a light at them in the dark, their eyes glow greenish-yellow because of a reflective layer behind the retina called the tapetum lucidum. That exact shade of greenish-yellow fluorescent that Shelley described is the textbook eye-shine color of a canid. Research in perceptual psychology has repeatedly demonstrated that fear distorts size estimation. People who are afraid of spiders perceive them as significantly larger than they actually are. Fear of heights causes people to overestimate vertical distances. The fight or flight response narrows your visual field, slows your perception of time, and fills in gaps with details your brain manufactures to match the level of threat you feel. A group of 5 large coyotes, each weighing 50+ pounds, with glowing green eyes and wolf-like features, encountered at night in mist by 2 terrified people who had already been primed by weeks of strange lights and a mysterious den in the woods, could absolutely be perceived as something much larger and more terrifying than what was actually there. And then, years later, after listening to hundreds of hours of Coast to Coast AM, after hearing Linda Godfrey describe the dogman with its bipedal stance and canine features and glowing eyes, is it so hard to imagine that Shelley's memory of that night shifted? That the coyotes grew taller in her mind? That the details became sharper and more specific with each retelling, each interview, each dramatic reenactment? A man named Justin, who lived in that same house after the Martins moved out, reported hearing howling in the woods at night. He said it was coyotes. He had no doubt about that. But he also reported something else. Apparitions, poltergeist activity, objects moving on their own. A man and woman in old-fashioned clothing standing at the foot of his bed. He did not call them wolves. He called the house evil. So maybe the real story of Palmyra is not about what species was standing in that field. Maybe it is about how a frightening but explainable encounter with wildlife became something else entirely when it passed through the mind of a person who was already looking for monsters. How a story changes shape every time it is told. How a TV show can turn coyotes into werewolves and make millions of people believe it. How the only photographs that could have answered the question were conveniently lost. How a family's worst night became a franchise. Or maybe there really are things in the woods of Maine that science has not found yet. Things that stand 7 feet tall and hunt in packs and vanish before dawn without leaving evidence behind. Things that are smart enough to surround a house and coordinate their movements, but not smart enough to open a door. Either way, something was outside that farmhouse on Madawaska Road. Eric Martin, a man who had hunted every animal in the state of Maine, looked at it and could not tell you what it was. And 20 years later, nobody else can either. That is what makes this story stay with you. Not the creatures, not the siege, but the fact that we will never actually know. Let us know what you think happened that night. Drop your thoughts in the comments and click on the cards on screen for more.